So kia ora, everyone. My name's James. I'm one of the co-founders of Bio Fab, which is a biotech startup working to replace traditional plastics that we use in this world with fungi mycelium. So can definitely make the exclaimer that I did not start as an expert in this field. I think I was after getting through sort of school with a C's get degrees attitude, I really tried hard to be a rugby player. During that time, I dropped in and out of uni 3 times. So I'm probably the epitome of not having much formal training in anything that I do. So, but as you'll sort of hopefully hear at the end of the presentation, you know, passion and drive and is a big part of succeeding in things. And if you've got half a head screwed on your shoulders and that drive, there's a lot you can achieve in this world. So at BioFab, our goal is to significantly reduce the harm that toxic materials are causing to the planet and encourage a world where our waste streams can actually regenerate and not destroy our natural environments. We're looking at trying to solve some pretty massive issues that are around the extraction of raw materials that we use for everyday plastics, and also how we dispose of them at the end of life. One of the key plastics that we're really targeting now is expanded polystyrene, otherwise known as EPS. So this material, I think everyone has come into contact with, and they understand what it is, whether that be their takeaway containers. I think luckily those are one of the things to be banned in New Zealand in 2022, along with further polystyrene in 2025. You would have seen it on a TV that you would have bought, or some whiteware or something. And what not too many people actually know is that it's in a lot of the walls and under the floors of the houses that we live in foundations and as insulation. So polystyrene, I think, is still used a lot because I say this with the caveat that it's actually an amazing material. Functionally, in terms of how it works and fit for purpose, it's great. But it's how we extract the raw materials and how we discard of it at its end of life where we are left with problems. So from in the last few years, the data shows that there's been about 14 million metric tons of polystyrene that are produced annually. They're estimating that 12 to 14% of that is escaping route to landfill and into our natural environments. Now, this photo is a pretty in-your-face photo about it, and admittedly, you know, you'd struggle to find a beach like this, say, in New Zealand. But what I think this does represent is that with so many plastics that we produce that escape into the natural environment, they do begin to break down into microplastics. So that's not biodegrading, that's not composting, that's just breaking down into particles so small that they become near impossible to manage. So when we start to look under the microscope, what's actually in our natural environment, there are already some areas in the world that do start to look like this photo here. And my hope is that we don't, you know, create a world where, especially in New Zealand, when we ride off such a clean green image, we're actually under the microscope, we have an environment that's full of plastic. So some of the key big things with polystyrene is that globally, it takes up anywhere from 25 to 30% of our landfills by volume. Now, it's a very light material, so that's not by weight, but in terms of space, it's consuming a huge amount of landfills globally. From that 14 million metric tons that are produced each year, that's releasing 68.6 million tons of carbon dioxide equivalents into the atmosphere per annum. And from a recent study from Stanford University that has put the true cost of carbon at $220 per ton, that equates to $15 billion in social harm. And that's having a negative impact on our human productivity, our agricultural yields, and human and animal health. So that covered a little bit about what these problems are with polystyrene in terms of the environment. Now, these problems here for manufacturers are some of those key ones that are actually going to drive a change in adoption of new materials. So, and this, I think, is broad enough where this covers, these problems cover a lot of other materials besides what we're just trying to look to create a solution for. So The first one, especially when it comes to polystyrene, that there's a lack of viable alternatives. As I said before, polystyrene functionally is great, but it's really hard to switch away for that, especially when your product relies to being safely transported. Now there's increasing regulation that is, this isn't sort of having to read writing on the wall anymore. This is regulation that is coming. So manufacturers are going to be forced to switch. And that there's also this driving trend towards a more circular economy. So those last two, what we are seeing is driving this change. And where manufacturers are really worried is that there's currently been a lack of viable alternatives, which is why we still use so much of the stuff. Now, our solution, made from mycelium, is a biocomposite that replaces traditional toxic materials in packaging and construction using fungi, called mushroom packaging. Now, we work with a company called Activism in the States, where we're using their technology to bring this out into New Zealand and Australia, and hopefully soon into Asia. The material functionally performs exactly like polystyrene. It's a direct drop-in replacement, both in terms of its protective value and its thermal capability. And up here is a few photos and give a snapshot of how it's currently being used. So when I first got into this business, you know, I was working within the packaging space, largely within sustainable packaging. Very quickly realized that materials like PLA weren't going to be the silver bullet that we needed to see in the world. And I heard of a bunch of really cool materials, but a lot of them were what I call, you know, stuck in the test tube. They weren't scaling. This was one of these very fantastical sounding materials that almost sounded too good to be true. But it was actually starting to scale. And you can start to see how we're starting to get some global brands using this material. There's a lot of work being done in the uses for it in construction as well. So, and this is really the low-hanging fruit side of the technology that you see. So it's really exciting to think what might come next with this material. We make the material with two main ingredients. First is the base of the composite, where we can use any type of lignocellulosic material, which in a more simplified way is any type of agricultural byproduct. At the moment, we're using hemp hurd, which is the wooden core of the hemp plant. That's currently one of the lowest value parts of the hemp plant. We can use things like pine, of which there is an abundance of it that is coming as waste from industry, all the way from the timber, the primary industry side, all the way down to finished goods from things like furniture. And the good thing about this technology and this material is that there is a wide array of available raw materials that can be used that are currently waste sources all throughout the world. So when we look at bringing this manufacturing locally to different areas, it's really exciting to look at what are the different waste streams in those areas that we can use with this. It's not kind of a one thing only works with this technology. And then the star of the show, which unfortunately my GIF isn't working, is the mycelium. So the mycelium is the root structure of a mushroom. It's made up of a bunch of individual fibers called hyphae. And these fibers will grow through our wood chip material, consuming a very small part of it to grow, but binding it all together. And it's replacing the need for glue and acting as a biological binder. Our solution is both compostable and biodegradable. We make an important distinction there because biodegradable has been dragged through the mud the last decade. And we believe that materials like this are biodegradable in terms of what that word should mean to an end consumer. If we get it back to our own manufacturing facility, we can recycle it. And from an LCA that was done, it is pound for pound 1/3 the amount of carbon emissions as to that of EPS. So there's a little bit about Bio Fab. You know, our goals are for significantly reduce the amount of plastic consumption in this world. Having to take our core technology being, you know, we're using nature, we're using things in nature and trying to make it fix some of our problems. We want to build a successful business in the modern sense of the word, but that also incorporates indigenous and natural knowledge, because I think there's a lot that we can learn from the past, that if we merge it with our modern sort of societies, that's really how we're going to take steps forwards. There's a really exciting space in terms of the continual development and research into the space of fungi. As my last slide, because I know I'm at my 10 minutes. This is kind of now to speak, which we'll do a little bit more in the Q&A, but about the challenges of setting up a business. This is coming from a perspective of being an entrepreneur, having a startup business. You know, there's lots of things besides the idea that you need to get right to get this to work. Luck being least of one of them. But these three core things, I think, encapsulate what you need to be thinking about if you're looking at starting a business that wants to drive impact into this world. Number one is that I always say that team is 51% of any good business. There's been a bunch of great ideas that have gone to bust because of a bad team. There's been some not so great ideas that have gone well with the great team. You've got to have that burning desire and passion, because that's what gets you through the tough times. And you know, you've really got to think as early as possible that if you're going to have a business that scales, you're going to eventually need capital in most cases to run. So that's an important part of any business, is thinking about when you start to grow, how are you going to fund that? Thank you for the opportunity to share a little bit about my journey and what Bio Fab's doing.